As well as being probably one of the world's best known companies, it's also one of the largest. But with Apple, considering they came out with what were earnings that smashed expectations at the end of April, how come the share price has been so weak and where could it go next? I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at Apple in a bit more detail, considering we've had their latest earnings about a month ago. For the stock, we had clearly a great run off the March lows last year, like many other tech companies. So the price was as low as $53 in March 2020. This year, we've seen all-time highs up at $145, so almost tripled, not quite off those March lows. But since then, it's been a bit flat. We had those earnings at the end of April, initial strength, but after that they faded and drifted a bit lower. So in this video, as usual, I'll talk a bit more about those earnings, what the recent news is for Apple, then we'll come back onto this and look at things in a bit more detail. Hello, I'm David Jones from Capital.com, and I thought this time around, let's take a look at one of the world's biggest companies, Apple. They had spectacular earnings about a month ago now, but the market reaction has been perhaps a little bit muted, so I thought let's catch up on the recent news, then jump back onto the platform and look at things from a technical analysis point of view. As usual, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, if you could click on subscribe, it does help support the channel, and it means we can continue to push out lots of content throughout the week on the various different stocks that we look at. Right, let's get into it and look at Apple in a bit more detail. So just in case you're not aware of who they are, founded in 1976, so position themselves as a multinational technology company whose, I think, best known product is the Apple iPhone that did pretty much revolutionize the world of smartphones and is still clearly one of the most popular phones out there. In terms of size, to put things in perspective, it's the largest US stock that trades on US markets by market capitalization, but by how much the company's worth, which also makes it one of the biggest companies in the world. It's worth, at the time of recording, just over $2.1 trillion. That's the market value of Apple as a company. So we did have earnings for Apple at the end of April, and these really, I think they were pretty blowout earnings. Sales were up for the quarter 54% compared to the same time in the previous year. Market expectations were for earnings per share of about 99 cents. They blew through that as well. So Apple's earnings per share came in at $1.40. So a massive outperformance. We did see the shares trade higher in aftermarket trading, but actually, since those earnings, the share price has slid. So it's dropped by around about 4% since the earnings. And I think perhaps they're being affected by some investor sentiment, feeling that some of these technology companies have gone too far. Clearly a massive boom during the coronavirus pandemic for companies like Apple, for example, where people are going to work from home, buy more laptops, buy more newer iPhones, buy tablets. And I think some investors perhaps a little bit wary around current valuations. But although they've slid since those earnings came out, the stock price of Apple is still 60% higher than where it was this time last year at the end of May 2020. So before we jump back on the chart, let's take a look at some of the big levels to watch. Then we'll have a look at the technicals in a bit more detail. So all-time highs for the Apple stock was set in January of this year, up at $145 a share. We've seen them lose ground since then, and for me, probably the most important peak after that potential resistance barrier is the high seen immediately after their earnings came out, so about $137 a share. On the downside is where it gets a bit more interesting, and I wonder if we'll see the stock price hold above the March low. So that March low was at $116. As usual, let's put some color on these numbers. Let's take a look on the platform at the charts and see what the technicals look like. I'm sure we're all familiar with the great trend the Apple stock price has had over the years. If we zoom in to the latest bit of the trend off the March lows in 2020, we did see the price push higher into January of this year, trading up to $145 a share, that sort of area. But since then, they've dropped. They've dropped about, $20 lower than where they were at those all-time highs. It's all gone, it feels a bit boring over the last few months for Apple. So let's take a look at the charts in a bit more detail. I've got a 20-day moving average on here. It does a great job when markets are trending. We had a buy signal as the price moved through the 20-day in April of 2020, and it stuck with it. Okay, we had a little bit of a sell signal along the way, then bought back again in July. But with the price going somewhat sideways over recent months, I don't think we're getting too much from that moving average at the moment. Perhaps if we zoom in, we're close to getting a crossover again above that moving average. Perhaps it ends up being a bit similar to the one we had at the end of March, where we did have something of a bounce higher. Maybe we'll come back and have a look at that in a bit more detail. But if we take a look at the RSI down here, the relative strength index, the last signal we had, I suppose, if we go back to the 12th of May, it did very briefly go oversold. So again, a suggestion that perhaps the weakness had gone a little bit too far in the Apple stock price. We have seen a slight recovery since then, nowhere near as oversold as it was back in late February, and we did see an important base back then as well. But let's take a look at the price action and the trends. So this trend line from the March lows did a good job, I think, on the way up, fell out of the trend line in February of this year. And we did see the price move lower, but I don't think we've got a new downtrend just yet. I think what many technical analysts would look at the moment is the idea of support and resistance. If we look at where the market sold off to in early March of this year, the shares got as low as 116. Sort of bit of a rally up to what I think is perhaps important medium-term resistance, 138, 139. Sold off again and held ahead of 120 this time round. So it does feel as if, we've got good support for Apple ahead of 110 a share. If we go back and pick up perhaps on the late November lows down at 112, 113. And then after that, of course, it moved out to fresh all-time highs. So at the moment, it's clearly lost, I think, a lot of momentum in recent months, but there still feels as if there's an appetite to be a buyer ahead of this sort of 110, 120 area. So I think a technical analyst would be looking at the potential for a run back up to those old highs, up around 138, 139, that sort of area. If we see that broken, then we can start thinking about a move back to the old all-time highs and perhaps even fresh all-time highs. So it does feel a bit sideways trading at the moment. And for me, if it started breaking below that old support, that old 116 support in March, we'd be pushing to fresh lows for the year, which is never really a good sign. And perhaps then that opens up a bit more momentum to the downside and we start looking for a move back to the September lows ahead of $100 a share. So a bit sideways at the moment. It does still feel, and the bias is more up than down. We've seen lots of support emerge below where the price is currently. So perhaps we can expect a short-term bounce, but clearly the trend at the moment, very different to how it was for much of last year. And it feels like it does really need to have a bit more of a major move in one way or another to give us a signal as to which way the next big trend is going to be for the Apple share price. That's it for this update in Apple. We'll see how things progress over the next few weeks and months and come back to it and have a look at it again in more detail. But for now, from me, David Jones and Capital.com, we'll leave things there. Good luck with your investing. For more trading videos just like this, please subscribe to our channel.